This is Ryan Cantor, a writer for TigerNet and Shaking the Southland. In this video, we'll be talking about Clemson recruiting. To help us do that, we have recruiting analyst Jason Priester from allclemsontigers.com. Welcome, Jason.
Thanks. Appreciate you having me on, Ryan. How you doing, bud?
Great. Thanks for doing this. Would like to get your thoughts on the 2023 class that Clemson brought in. Big class for Clemson, at least, biggest since 2019 with 26 kids. One five-star, Peter Woods, 18 four-stars, an incredible defensive line class. Why don't you start your thoughts overall, and then maybe we can talk a little bit about the defensive linemen in particular.
Yeah, I think this is a very solid recruiting class. You kind of hit on all your needs. Got the guys that you needed to get. Obviously, you don't hit on every guy that you wanted to get. That was at the top of your board, but from top to bottom, this is a very solid class. I think there's several guys that are fairly underrated, a couple that are criminally underrated. We'll see how that plays out in the future, but it all starts in the trenches. 3 offensive linemen, 6 defensive linemen. I think Thomas Austin killed it in his first recruiting class. I think Nick Eason killed it in his first recruiting class, and I think they got some very good edge rushers to go along with those interior defensive linemen.
Yeah, Nick Eason, in part because of this amazing recruiting class, was named the best recruiter in the ACC. What do you think of some of these defensive linemen? Can Peter Woods start a defensive end potentially midway through the season, or at least get a lot of snaps? You got Vic Burley, Tamarian Parker, you have Green. How quick can they make an impact? What's their upside long term? What do you think?
I think they hit on every one of those guys. And I absolutely believe Peter Woods is a guy that can come in and can contribute early. Clemson's a little thin at defensive end, and Peter Woods is a guy in that Christian Wilkins mold where he can play inside or outside, and I think that's going to serve Clemson well this season. He projects more of it as an inside guy, but I think he can play at a high level in either spot that you need him. If you're asking me for one player in this class that's bound to make an immediate impact, I'm going with him. I think Tamarian Parker is another guy who's going to have some opportunity to play early. He's the only early enrollee out of those defensive ends. And again, we know Clemson's a little thin there. So there's going to be some opportunity for him. And he looks like he's already physically ready to play. We'll see where he is mentally. But I think they hit on all those defensive linemen. Vic Burley, Stephon Green, A.J. Hoffler, David Ojebi. I think that's how they say his last name. I think he's one of the guys that is him and Hoffler both. I think those are two of the guys that are fairly underrated in this class. I think they all 6 have extremely high upside. Now, whether that translates into playing early, who knows? But I think they have extremely high upside.
You mentioned the trenches in general, including the offensive line, and how Thomas Austin's done a good job. Do you sense a step change from where they were just a couple of years ago with Robbie Caldwell? Clemson's brought in some pretty decent recruits at offensive line, and they've had okay offensive lines, but it's never been a strength. Is the recruiting taking a step up? Is the coaching getting them to the next level? Is it half and half? What are your thoughts on the O line here?
I thought the recruiting kind of started to turn around in 2020 and then really started to turn around in 2021. You haven't seen the fruits of that labor all pay off yet from that 2021 class, but we started to see some of it, like Dietrich Pennington was a member of that class. Injuries have kind of held him back. But in 2022, you had Colin Sadler and Blake Miller, and I think we can all agree that those guys have a ton of potential. We've already seen it with Miller. And I think they signed 3 more extremely good players in the 2023 class, all 4-star guys, if I'm not mistaken. Zachariah Owens, Harris Sewell, Ian Reed. Owens is coming off ACL injury. Wouldn't expect him to have any kind of impact as a freshman, most likely. But I think Sewell is a guy to keep an eye on, maybe a wild card name to know, possibly crack that too deep. Not sure about Reed, but again, I think these are all 3 guys that have bright futures along the offensive line. And I do think Thomas Austin has started to make an effort to bring in more size along the offensive line. these guys seem to be bigger than what Clemson was typically bringing in, during the Robbie Caldwell years. Maybe that started to change a little bit towards the end of Caldwell's tenure. But I do think they are starting to make the effort to bring in more size, and I think that was something that they needed to do.
Yeah, Harris Sewell is the top-rated offensive lineman in the class. He is the 158th best player nationally, according to 247, a four-star out of Texas. Let me ask you about the skill positions now before we wrap up. Clemson added 2 running backs, 4 wide receivers. Only 2 of those 6 are 4 or 5 stars or blue chips. Ronan Hannafin out of Massachusetts, I think he's an exciting prospect, and Noble Johnson out of Texas. I guess your thoughts on them, but also I'm concerned that NIL is particularly important for those skill position players. It's not to say Clemson's stance on NIL and not to say they're not using it in an appropriate way, but it does seem like NIL is becoming more and more important. Clemson's recruiting at those positions where NIL is especially important might be trending down. Do you see a correlation? Do you have any concern about recruiting those 2 skill positions long term?
NIL actually absolutely has an impact on the skill positions. Those higher rated guys tend to create bidding wars, and we know Clemson's not getting into bidding wars for players. So that kind of makes your evaluations even that much more important. I happen to think Noble Johnson is one of the more criminally underrated guys in this class. Ronan Hannafin is a guy that doesn't get talked about very much, but I think he is very talented, big-bodied outside guy. It'll be interesting to see how NIL affects Clemson's recruiting of the skill spots going forward. Again, it tends to be a position that creates some bidding wars. Dabo Swinney's not getting into bidding wars. So, again, it's going to make the evaluations and the development that much more important. And I think, to say it's not a concern, that would just be an untruth. It's absolutely something you have to keep an eye on moving forward, because the landscape's changing. It's changing rapidly. It seems to be changing every day. And we'll see how they navigate this thing. But I do think they got 3 very good wide receivers in this class. The recruiting rankings might not show it for all 3 of those guys. And I'm counting Tink Kelly. I'm not really necessarily counting him as a wide receiver. I know he's taken as a wide receiver. He's actually taken as an athlete. He's going to play wide receiver in his first year. But
the third one you're thinking, Tyler Brown out of Greenville, was going to Minnesota, got a late offer from Clemson.
I think he is a very dynamic player. It's on that Greenville team with Mazio Bennett. And I happen to think of those 2 guys, Clemson got the better receiver. I know Bennett's probably higher rated, and they're in different classes, but I think Clemson got the more dynamic player. I think he's a smaller, twitchier guy, extremely quick, extremely fast. He can create a ton of matchup problems, with that speed. And again, I think Noble Johnson, I watched him work out at Dabo's high school camp last year, and he was extremely impressive. He was the best wide receiver, in my opinion, that I watched over those few days. He is built like a tank. He is a physical specimen. He gets in and out of his breaks extremely quickly. He's a very precise route runner, very good hands. Don't recall him dropping one pass. And again, Hannafin's a guy we don't hear a lot about, but I think he's going to surprise people that don't know a lot about him. I think he's got a lot of upside. I know I like to use that word a lot, but a lot of upside. And looking at those 2 running backs, when I watch Jay Haynes, I get Wayne Gallman vibes. I don't know why. He just reminds me of Wayne Gallman, his running style. He needs to add a little bit of bulk, and the trick for him will be because he's got some speed, he's got some wheels. So the trick for him will be adding some weight while not losing that speed. But I think he's a guy he plays at a very small high school in Georgia, was overlooked for a long time, and just nobody knew about him. I think Clemson just kind of happened upon him by luck. Somebody sent him his film. They got in on him. They liked what they saw, and it's not a ton of film available on him that I can find. But again, gives me Wayne Gallman vibes, and anybody that follows recruiting in South Carolina knows who Jarvis Green is. He's been the catalyst in that Dutch Fork offense for a couple of seasons now. I watched him play live. I actually watched him play live one night. I went to watch Antonio Williams during Williams' senior season, and Jarvis Green ended up stealing the show. But while I love Jarvis Green as the second running back take, might not would have been as happy if he was the only back in the class. But if he's your second running back take, I love that take. It's a risk reward thing, no doubt. He's probably not an every down back. We'll see how it plays out. A lot of people think he's a product of that Dutch Fork system. He doesn't like it when you ask him about that. he doesn't believe that at all.
Dutch Fork, that's Will Taylor, Antonio Williams, a lot of Clemson players lately, right?
Yeah, very explosive offense. I think they've won 5 out of the last 6 state titles in their classification. But yeah, like I said, I've watched Jarvis play one night live, and I've watched a ton of his film. He doesn't do anything but make plays. He catches the ball out of the backfield. He can run between the tackles. He can run out and around the outside. Again, a lot of people don't think he's an every down back at the Power 5 level. Maybe he is, maybe he's not. But again, if he's not, I still like him as your second take. There are some things you can do with him. He doesn't have to be your every down back. You can use him in the slot some. There's a lot of different ways you can use that kid. He's got a lot of talent.
Gotcha. Yeah. Haynes right now is listed at 6 foot 185, so it makes sense you say he has to add a little weight. Jarvis Green, he is the 63rd ranked running back. Haynes is the 71st ranked running back. Sounds like you think they'll beat both of those marks.
Yeah, I think both those guys are a little underrated. I mean, I get it. I know how those things work. Again, nobody had heard of Haynes halfway through his senior season. Not only does he play at that tiny high school there in Georgia, but I think it's in Georgia, but
it's Roanoke, Alabama.
Alabama, that's right.
Okay,
my bad. But he also plays at a high school that really places a premium on seniority. So he didn't really get to play a whole lot and start, until his senior season. So he kind of came out of nowhere. But, this is a kid that was rushing for 200, 300, 400 yards per game. And I'm not sure if it was the greatest competition, but, those are some eye-popping numbers. I think he rushed for over close to 300 the first time C.J. Spiller went and saw him, and he had an offer shortly after that. But
yeah, I bet.
Again, I'm telling you, when I watch his film, he gives me Wayne Gallman vibes, and maybe that's just me. But if you can get a little bit of what you got out of Wayne Gallman, you probably hit on this kid.
You're doing good, yeah. Well, that was Jason Priester from allclemsontigers.com. Be sure to check him out there as well as on Twitter. You can see his handle right below there. Thanks for joining us, Jason.
Yeah, my pleasure, Ryan. Anytime, man.
Thanks.